November 1942. The fog-choked streets of Copenhagen lay silent under Nazi occupation. A German officer, Hauptmann Klaus Hoffmann, walked alone from his headquarters, his polished boots clicking against the cobblestones. He just finished interrogating 3 Danish resistance members. Tomorrow, they'd face the firing squad. He never heard the footsteps behind him. A figure emerged from the shadows, a SOE agent codenamed Victor, gripping what looked like a rusted water pipe wrapped in cloth. No gleaming pistol, no military precision, just an ugly, ungainly tube that seemed more suited to a plumber's toolbox than an assassin's hand. Victor pressed the crude metal cylinder against the base of Hoffmann's skull. One muffled crack, barely louder than a book dropping, and the Hauptmann crumpled silently into the fog. No alarm, no witnesses, no trace except a dead Nazi officer and a question that would haunt the Gestapo for years. What weapon could kill this quietly? The answer was the well rod pistol. And it didn't just kill Germans, it terrorized them. Because when your officers start dying in silence, when no one hears the shot that ends a life, when the weapon leaves almost no forensic evidence behind, paranoia becomes your greatest enemy. This ugly British pipe, dismissed by some as crude, mocked for its appearance, became the most feared assassination tool in occupied Europe. The Nazis offered rewards for information about it. The Gestapo warned their officers never to walk alone. And the British? They kept producing it in absolute secrecy, dropping it into the hands of resistance fighters who used it to wage a silent war that the Germans couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't stop. But how did a weapon that looked like scrap metal become the stuff of Nazi nightmares? Let's go back to 1940. Britain stood alone against Hitler's war machine. Continental Europe had fallen. From Norway to France, the swastika flew over occupied cities, and Nazi officers enforced brutal control with public executions, curfews, and terror. Winston Churchill wasn't content to wait. But how do you ignite a continent from across the English Channel? How do you fight an enemy that controls every factory, every port, every street corner? The answer was unconventional warfare, sabotage, assassination, psychological terror. And for that, Britain needed weapons that didn't exist, tools that could kill silently, disappear into a coat pocket, leave no evidence, and put the fear of God into every Nazi officer walking alone at night. Traditional firearms were useless for this work. A Webley revolver? Too loud. One shot would bring half a garrison running. A Browning pistol? Even suppressed firearms of the era were failures. Early silencers overheated, broke after a few shots, or still produced gunshot-level noise that echoed through occupied streets. The SOE needed something revolutionary, something that could kill at point-blank range with no more sound than a whisper. Something so unassuming that even if searched by the Gestapo, an agent might talk their way out of it. Something that looked like junk but functioned like death itself. Enter Station I, the SOE's secret research facility tucked away in Welwyn, Hertfordshire. And in 1942, they created the well rod. But what made this ugly pipe so deadly? And why did the Germans come to fear it more than any other weapon in the resistance arsenal? The Wellrod Mark I didn't look like a weapon. Hold it at the wrong angle and you'd swear it was a bicycle pump or a piece of industrial piping. That was the entire point. Designed by Major Hugh Reeves at Station I, the Wellrod measured just under 12 inches long. Short enough to hide in a coat, but long enough to house the most sophisticated suppression system ever created. 65mm rounds, later upgraded to 9mm in the Mark II, from a single-shot bolt-action mechanism that made absolutely no mechanical noise beyond the bolt itself. But the real magic? The integral suppressor that formed the weapon's entire front half. Here's what most people don't understand about silencers. They don't make guns silent, they make them quieter. A standard 9mm pistol produces around 160 decibels, louder than a jet engine at takeoff. Even with a conventional suppressor, you're still looking at 120 to 130 decibels, the level of a thunderclap. The Wellrod? 73 decibels, quieter than a car door closing, quieter than normal conversation. In field tests, operatives fired the well rod in one room while German guards stood in the next and heard nothing. How did Station I achieve this miracle? Through brutal, elegant engineering. The suppressor wasn't an afterthought bolted onto the barrel. It was the weapon. The entire front section contained a series of rubber wipes, circular discs with holes just slightly smaller than the bullet diameter. As the round passed through, each wipe sealed behind it, trapping the explosive gases that create gunshot noise. Behind the wipes sat metal baffles, angled chambers that further dispersed gas and reduced pressure. The bullet traveled through this maze, shedding energy and sound at every stage, until it emerged at lethal velocity but nearly silent. The genius was in the disposability. Those rubber wipes degraded with each shot. After about 6 rounds, they'd wear out, and the weapon would grow louder. But for an assassination mission, 6 shots was 6 dead Nazis. And in the field, SOE agents could replace the wipes with materials as simple as leather washers cut from a boot. But it wasn't just about the sound. The well rod's bolt-action mechanism was deliberately chosen. No semi-automatic cycling, no ejected brass casings clattering across a cobblestone street. After firing, the agent manually cycled the bolt, silently, and pocketed the spent casing. 0 forensic evidence left behind. The magazine held 6 rounds in the Mark I, 8 in the Mark II. Not much firepower, but this wasn't designed for firefights. This was an assassin's tool meant for one purpose: approach silently, kill instantly, disappear completely. The grip was skeletal, just a metal frame with a crude trigger. Why? Because the well rod could be disassembled in seconds. Unscrew the suppressor section, remove the bolt, and suddenly you're holding 4 innocent-looking metal tubes and a spring. Hide them separately, and even the most thorough Gestapo search would find nothing incriminating. But here's the detail that shows how deeply Station 9 understood their users. The well rod had no sights, none. Because you didn't aim this weapon, you pressed it against your target. The suppressor was designed to be placed directly against flesh or clothing. At contact range, even the crude barrel and lack of rifling couldn't miss. And the close contact method further muffled the sound. The target's body absorbed even more of the report. It was ugly, it was crude, it was absolutely perfect. The well rod never officially existed. Even today, exact production numbers remain classified. Best estimates suggest between 2,800 and 14,000 units were manufactured during the war, a massive range that speaks to the weapon's secrecy. What we do know, production was scattered across multiple facilities under innocuous cover names. Another from a workshop in Welwyn itself, the town that gave the weapon its name. The well rod was just an internal cryptonym never used in the field. The weapon was classified under the highest levels of secrecy, higher than many aircraft designs, higher than radar technology. Why? Because if the Germans captured one intact and reverse-engineered the suppressor design, Britain's advantage would evaporate overnight. Every well rod issued came with strict instructions. Use it, destroy it, or hide it so thoroughly that capture was impossible. SOE agents were ordered to disassemble and scatter components after missions. Resistance fighters buried them in forests, bricked them into walls, submerged them in wells, anywhere the Gestapo wouldn't find them. Some were marked with proof stamps, some weren't. Some came in leather holsters disguised as tool rolls, others in plain cloth wrappings. The inconsistency was deliberate. No standardization meant no pattern for German intelligence to track. Little did the Germans know, these ugly pipes were being dropped across occupied Europe by the hundreds. May 1943, the forest outside Lyon, France. A milice collaborator named Henri Bouchard had sent 17 resistance members to their deaths. The Free French wanted him gone, but publicly executing him would bring Wehrmacht reprisals against the entire village. The SOE sent a well rod. Agent Philippe tracked Bouchard for 3 days, learning his routine. Every evening, Bouchard walked alone from his mistress's apartment to his car, 50 meters through an alley, unguarded, arrogant in his Nazi protection. On the third night, Philippe waited in the darkness. Bouchard passed. Philippe stepped from the shadows, pressed the well-rod suppressor against the base of Bouchard's skull, and fired. The traitor fell. Philippe caught the body, lowered it silently, pocketed the casing, and walked away. By the time German patrols found Bouchard 2 hours later, Philippe was 12 kilometers away, the well rod disassembled and hidden in 3 different farmhouses. The milice never found the killer. They never found the weapon. And the message to other collaborators was chilling. Betray the resistance and you'll die silently, invisibly, unstoppably. This wasn't an isolated incident. From Norway to Greece, the well rod wrote a shadow history of World War II. In Denmark, SOE agent Anders Lassen, later awarded a posthumous Victoria Cross, used a well rod to eliminate a German counterintelligence officer who'd infiltrated Danish resistance networks. The officer died in his own headquarters. No guards heard a sound. In Holland, resistance fighters used well rods to execute NSB collaborators, Dutch Nazis who'd sold out their neighbors. The weapons became symbols of justice, passed hand to hand through underground networks, their very existence whispered about in coded messages. In France, the Maquis, rural resistance fighters, received well rod drops alongside plastic explosives and radio equipment. They used them to eliminate sentries before sabotage operations, killing quietly so the larger mission could proceed undetected. The weapon's psychological impact multiplied beyond its actual use. German officers began requesting bodyguards for routine walks. The Gestapo issued warnings about silent weapons in internal memos, describing them as more dangerous than grenades or machine guns because they struck without warning and left no trace. Nazi paranoia became a weapon itself. How many officers jumped at shadows? How many collaborators reconsidered their allegiances, knowing a silent death could come at any moment? How many resources did the Germans waste hunting for a weapon that looked like plumbing? But what if the well rod had weaknesses that could have undermined everything? The well rod wasn't perfect, far from it. That crude construction that made it easy to manufacture also made it temperamental. The bolt was stiff. Cycling it required real force, loud enough to alert a nearby guard. Agents were trained to cycle the bolt only when masking noise was available, a passing truck, a train whistle, a moment of distraction. The rubber wipes degraded quickly. After 6 shots, suppression dropped noticeably. After 12, the weapon was as loud as a standard suppressed pistol. And replacing wipes in the field required tools and time, not always available when Gestapo patrols were hunting you. But what if the well rod had weaknesses that could have undermined everything? The well rod wasn't perfect, far from it. That crude construction that made it easy to manufacture also made it temperamental. The bolt was stiff. Cycling it required real force, loud enough to alert a nearby guard. Agents were trained to cycle the bolts only when masking noise was available, a passing truck, a train whistle, a moment of distraction. The rubber wipes degraded quickly. After 6 shots, suppression dropped noticeably. After 12, the weapon was as loud as a standard suppressed pistol. And replacing wipes in the field required tools and time, not always available when Gestapo patrols were hunting you. Accuracy beyond contact range was abysmal. The crude barrel and lack of sights meant that at anything over 3 meters, hitting your target required luck as much as skill. This was a weapon meant to be pressed against flesh. Anything else was a gamble. And there was the moral weight. SOE agents were trained soldiers, but many resistance fighters receiving well rods were civilians, shopkeepers, teachers, farmers, suddenly transformed into assassins. The weapon's intimate nature, pressing it against someone's head, feeling their last breath, took a psychological toll that stayed with operators for decades. But despite these limitations, the well rod remained in production throughout the war and beyond. Why? Because when you needed to kill silently, nothing else came close. The Germans weren't passive. By late 1943, Gestapo intelligence files contained sketches of the silent pistol, crude drawings based on interrogation testimonies and captured equipment fragments. They knew it existed. They knew it was British, but they never fully understood its design or how to stop it. Security protocols changed across occupied territories. Officers traveled in pairs. Collaborators hired bodyguards. The SS offered rewards for information, 1,000 Reichsmarks for a Welrod, dead or alive. In some regions, German soldiers conducted raids specifically hunting for pipe-like weapons, searching homes and arresting anyone found with unusual metal tubes. But it was too late. The Welrod had already spread too far, hidden too well. And the paranoia it generated was almost as valuable as the kills it achieved. German resources, manpower, time, intelligence focus were diverted chasing shadows. Every mysterious death, even those from conventional weapons or natural causes, became potential Welrod kills in the German mind. The psychological victory was complete. Success bred iteration. The Mark II emerged in 1943, chambered in 9mm parabellum with an improved grip and slightly better ergonomics. Some units received experimental versions with longer barrels or modified suppressor designs for specific missions. Station Ikes also developed the Welrod carbine, a shoulder-fired variant with a stock and extended barrel for slightly longer range work. It never saw widespread use, but its existence shows how seriously the SOE took suppressed weapons technology. After the war, the Welrod influenced an entire generation of covert firearms. The Soviet PSS silent pistol, developed in the 1970s, used similar principles. Modern suppressed pistols owe intellectual debts to Station Ike's work. And the weapon itself remained in British Special Forces arsenals well into the 1990s, over 50 years after its creation. You won't believe what happened when Vietnam-era Special Forces requested Welrods for classified operations decades after World War II ended. When the war ended, most Welrods were supposed to be destroyed. Supposed to be being the operative phrase. Thousands disappeared, buried by resistance fighters who couldn't bring themselves to destroy the weapon that had saved their lives, spirited away by SOE agents as mementos, or simply lost in the chaos of demobilization. Some surfaced decades later. In 2001, French construction workers found a cache of WW2 weapons in a sealed basement, including a Welrod still wrapped in its original cloth. In 2015, a Norwegian farmer plowing his field unearthed 3 Welrods buried in 1944 and forgotten, still functional after 70 years underground. The weapon remained classified until the 1970s. Veterans who'd used it couldn't speak about it for decades. Families of SOE agents learned about their parents' wartime work only through declassified files released long after the operators had died. But the legend lived on in whispers. The ugly pipe that killed Nazis silently. The weapon so secret it didn't officially exist. The tool that let ordinary people strike back against an empire of evil. Behind every Welrod kill was a human story, not all of them heroic. Some resistance fighters executed the wrong targets, mistaken identities in the fog of war. Some collaborators genuinely repented before a silenced bullet found them. Some German officers were conscripts, just following orders, dying alone in foreign streets far from home. War is never clean. The Welrod didn't make it cleaner, but it gave occupied peoples a tool to fight back when conventional resistance was suicide. It let them reclaim agency in a world designed to crush them. And it reminded the Nazis that their occupation, for all its might and terror, could be challenged, one silent shot at a time. The Welrod Mark I and II were never beautiful weapons. They were crude, ugly, brutally functional tools built for a brutal, ugly war. But beauty isn't measured in aesthetics. It's measured in effectiveness. And by that standard, the Welrod was a masterpiece. It killed efficiently. It terrified strategically. It gave hope to the hopeless and fear to the fearful. For less than 12 inches of metal tubing and some rubber washers, Station Ike's created a weapon that punched far above its weight. A weapon that forced an empire to look over its shoulder, to walk in pairs, to jump at shadows. The Germans called it Das Todesrohr, the death tube. Resistance fighters called it salvation. SOE agents called it ugly. All of them were right. Today, the Welrod sits in museums, displayed behind glass alongside the great weapons of World War II. Visitors walk past it, often missing it entirely, just an odd metal pipe among the Stens and Webleys and Brownings. They don't know the stories it contains. They don't hear the whispers of agents in fog-choked streets or the final gasps of Nazi officers who never saw death coming. But those who know, veterans, historians, weapon designers, they stop at that case. They lean in, and they understand. Sometimes the most feared weapon doesn't need to look dangerous. Sometimes it just needs to work. And this ugly British pipe? It worked perfectly. What other ungentlemanly weapons did Britain create in World War II's Shadow War? The Welrod was just one tool in Station Ike's deadly arsenal. If this story fascinated you, there's so much more darkness to uncover in Churchill's secret war.